before I live at the end of your leash.
Of course, saving him was going to come back to bite Holden in the ass. As always, I'm Al. This is the Geek in Review, so let's get to it. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about The Expanse Season 6, Episode 4, Redoubt. So if you haven't seen it yet, this will contain spoilers, and I hope you've had a fantastic new year. So every other episode this season, we open up in Laconia, and now it picks up pretty much where we left off last week with the child's death. And it is mentioned that it was an accident, so there wasn't any sort of foul play or danger on the planet that caused this. We do also get some backstory about how the people ended up on this planet. We find out that Kara's parents were only supposed to be there for a few months and were part of a survey team that just decided to stay. And when she's at the sort of wake or funeral of her brother, an ex-Martian tells her that he lost a place that he loved as well. So it's fairly obvious that he is talking about Mars, as we've seen its decline since the ring opened. And my first thought was, is this Duarte? Now, we've had Duarte name-checked a few times. He was mentioned in the very last scene of the last season when the Martian ship disappeared. If you don't know who he is, in the books, Duarte plays a huge role. He's the leader on Laconia, and I'm kind of reluctant to talk any more about him because his role is so big, and I'm really shocked that we're getting to see him in this episode, because does this mean that they're setting stuff up to pay off later on in maybe another format or another season? Because with Duarte showing up and in the ships that Marcos had last week, they're definitely mentioning events that are happening in the last 2 or 3 books. So with only a few episodes to go, I don't see how they're going to squeeze this in. I keep saying that every week, but I was really excited when I figured out that it was Duarte. Because in the last 3 novels, although Laconia seems like a peaceful place, it does become the main sort of threat or the main villain. But on the Rocinante, it's still on its way to Ceres. Naomi is studying the data on Marco's ship, the Pella, to help hunt him and track him down. Well, Amos is repairing the ship with Bobby, and she's pissed about the lack of Marco killing last week. The big question is Holden's secret going to come out? Yeah, of course it does. It pretty much comes out straight away, and not exactly where you think it was going to come from. Clarissa finds out and tells Amos, then he confronts Holden while they're working on repairs outside the ship to repair the battle from last week. Now, Amos isn't exactly as angry as you'd expect him to be. He just doesn't understand Holden's decision, so it's sort of like he's maybe 50% angry and 50% disappointed, but it wasn't the reaction that I was expecting after being with Amos for all these seasons. But I suppose he knows Holden, so he knows that he must have a good reason for it. He just wants to find out what it is, but he doesn't really sort of directly ask him. He kind of gives him the opportunity to tell him, but Holden doesn't really want to spill his guts on this one. Naomi's still investigating the disappearance of the ring ships, and Holden comes to see her and confesses about what he's done with the Torpedo. And to be honest, she's a lot more pissed than Amos was. She doesn't want the weight of the war or any more deaths on her back because he couldn't pull the trigger on her ex. And Holden doesn't want to kill her son, so this is going to be a tricky one. And this episode does have a lot of talking over action, and that's perfectly fine. That's what I've come to expect from The Expanse. I can't help but wonder and ask myself, what would I do if I was in that situation? But Naomi seems to know that in order to win this war or win this conflict, her son might have to die in order for them to be victorious. But Bobby's the only one in the ship that doesn't figure it out or doesn't get told because she's really pissed. They have a little brief discussion between Clarissa and Holden and Amos about telling on the side that's best not to, as it won't affect anything. There's another great bonding scene in this episode as well between Clarissa and Holden, so she really is beginning to gel and fit into the crew. The Bobby and Amos stuff is always brilliant. I wish we got to see more of them. But back in the belt after the shock explosion last week, disaster area after the bomb, it wasn't a catastrophic attack to the way it looked, but they do mention some casualties, and there was something like 100 or just over 100 Earth and Mars casualties combined. And this bombing and the fact that Marcos has left them high and dry and dependent on the UN and Mars is causing some debate. A lot of the Belters see taking the UN help as a form of sort of submitting to Earth, so they're going back to being a little bit more fractured than they ever were before, or at least as fractured as they were when we've seen them in the first few seasons. Decide to make it public. Marco is playing the PR game here, and he's not the only one. Avasuala lets Monica publish her video, and yeah, this does have an effect, and it does sort of have the desired effect that she wanted to last week, showing the true side of not only what's going on in the belt, but what's going on Earth as well. It doesn't paint a pretty picture, and neither side of it comes off particularly well, which is kind of the harsh reality of conflict at the end of the day, so I was glad that they included this and they'd done it in. Avasuala seems to be taking a bit of a backseat so far this season. But the union between Earth and Mars maybe isn't that strong, as one of the Martian captains point out that they don't have the numbers to police and secure Ceres, especially if there's going to be more. The Martians want to attack and retake the ring, but Christian doesn't want to commit to a set strategy in case she's playing into Marco's hands. But Mars seems to have its own idea on how it's going to pursue this conflict going forward. We don't really get a definitive answer on this. I don't really see them betraying Earth. I think it'll be more they'll do something or take an action without telling them, which you could argue is the same thing, but it's more omitting a truth than telling a lie. He's planning his next move, but then again, when isn't he? This guy's always up to something. He seems to be about 20 moves ahead of everyone. But things around him are slowly falling apart. Filip's now been demoted to ship repairs. Since the start of the season, this has been a constant downward spiral for him. Renfield gives him a talking to about his attitude, so you sort of think that she's a true believer, because the way that she confronts Filip when he says, "You don't know who my dad is, if you died this is what would happen," and she says, "Yeah, I know, I'm just a soldier in this war." But something happens later on that I'll get to in a minute where you think, oh, she's not that hardcore a believer after all. Totally aware of who Marco is, and yeah, I just wonder how many other people are hanging on to this guy's coattails because there's no one else better around. And I'm not going to ruin the scene too much between the confrontation between them, but as he's been demoted to repair duty, when they're scouring the hull for damage, they do find a torpedo that Holden failed to detonate still inside the ship, and they find out it's been disarmed as well. It's pretty much intact. Initially they think it's a malfunction, but if Marco finds out, he might put this together, because later on they do analyse it and they find out the torpedo was disarmed on purpose rather than it being a dud. Now, Drummer finally gets her story picking up a little bit more this week. She's on the offensive and she's attacking one of Marco's supply bases, and this is sort of the old school combat that we got in the Expanse, particularly around season 2 when it was the Behemoth and they were trying to get onto the asteroid. So they sneak on board the base and everything doesn't quite go to plan. It's not really a huge win. A member of her crew gets trapped during the attack, so she's either basically got to decide to leave him to get interrogated by Marcos, kill him, or try and cut his arm off to get him free, because he gets trapped by a sort of fallen crate, and yeah, he leaves with them and it's pretty fucking gruesome. I'm not going to post any pictures or any clips for obvious reasons, so it's a win, but it's a win at a pretty huge cost. Drummer's attack sort of has the counter effect, because Filip has been very, let's say, losing interest or losing belief in his father, would be a more accurate way of saying it since this season started. But once he hears about Drummer's attack, it kind of reignites the fire in his belly and the belief in his father's cause. So I don't really know where the story is going with this. Does Filip really believe that, or is he just uses this as an excuse to get back up the ladder to the position that he was? He doesn't seem particularly happy, but he was less happy in the first few episodes as opposed to where he is now. I think because he's not the one pulling the trigger anymore, he's sort of had time to breathe and time to find himself again. But as I said earlier on, I wasn't initially a huge fan of Filip when he showed up in the show, but I'm enjoying the conflict that the character's been going through this season. Naomi's mentioned that she's aware that he might have to die in order to win this war, and I'm sure he's aware of it, and I'm definitely sure that his father's aware of it as well, so that's weighing on everyone's mind is he's still a pawn caught in the middle. But picking up with the Laconia stuff slightly, we see Marco reviewing the new ship designs. We don't get any other information on them, but they're definitely teasing this Laconia threat, and it really is getting me excited about what could come next for The Expanse after season 6 ended. And as I mentioned earlier on, Rosenfield isn't really that much of a true believer. We find out she's got a price, and it's a pretty high one. She wants to run Medina Station, or the Ring Station, which, when you think about it, would make her pretty much the most powerful person in the solar system, because think about all the cuts she could take, the trade routes that she could manipulate, the stock and supplies that could be stolen, the backhanders, the politicians. She would basically control access to all these different worlds and resources. So it would make her insanely rich and powerful, but it also means that she's maybe not as loyal as we initially thought she was, because again, she ain't here for the benefit of anyone else but herself, and she does have a price. So when Marco becomes sort of too much trouble, is she just going to turn tail and turn him over? I think she could be the one that actually betrays him. It'll probably be Filip, but I'd like to think it would be Rosenfeld as well. But as always, we're going to have to wait and see. Now, this was a little bit of a slow burner this week, and it definitely seems to be setting things up for future ideas, but with only 2 more episodes to go, I don't know how they're going to fit it in, and I know I say that every week. I'd love to see the rest of the books make it to screen, as the space battle stuff between Laconia is absolutely insane. If you've read the books, then you know what happens. I am definitely not going to spoil it, because it is fantastic. If they ever say that they're going to make more Expanse, I'll talk about it, but until then, I'm not going to. So although season 6 is the finale on Amazon, with Duarte showing up in all these Laconia mentions, I do feel in a much better place about the fact that we might be getting more of the Expanse in the future. But this episode for me wasn't a brilliant episode, but what it did is it made me excited about the future of the Expanse, and I hope you guys feel the same. Let me know what you thought of that episode in the comments below. Let me know what you think they're going to do with the Expanse after this season ends. As always, I'm Al, this has been The Geek in Review. Thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, please leave a like on the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do that as well. It would mean so much, and I'm posting new content all the time. Again, I hope you have a fantastic new year, and thanks for taking the time to watch this.